There's a high school in Pocatello, Idaho that's been standing since 1893. Most people drive past it without a second thought. But the people who work inside it, the ones who show up on holidays when the hallways are empty and the lights are supposed to be off, they tend to stop talking about it after a while. Not because nothing happened, because something did and they didn't know what to do with it. Security camera footage from a school holiday. No students, no staff, building locked, captured electrical disturbances moving through the hallways, and what appears to be a figure walking out of a bathroom. Custodians working alone in the theater have reported seeing a woman in a dress standing near the stage. Students have reported a presence in the gym that doesn't move the way it should. Now, put on your headphones. Tonight's 7 stories are among the most unsettling accounts I've ever narrated. I mean that. If something like this has ever happened to you, or to someone you know, and you've never had anyone to tell it to, send it to us. Our Gmail is in description. Some stories deserve to be heard. Story 1. The footage nobody asked for. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m., and the camera was pointed at a hallway that wasn't supposed to have anyone in it. Marcus had worked district security in Pocatello for 11 years. Desk job, mostly. He reviewed camera logs after incidents. Busted windows, vandalism, the occasional kid trying to sleep in the gym over a long weekend. Quiet work. He liked quiet work. He had a bad knee, a thermos he refilled twice a shift, and a particular way of fast-forwarding through footage where he'd move his whole body slightly forward in the chair, like leaning in would help him see better. The call came in on a Thursday in October, holiday weekend. No staff, no custodial crew. Building was locked by 6 p.m. Friday and wasn't supposed to be touched until Tuesday. Standard protocol. Someone from the main office had flagged an electrical anomaly in the system log. A few lights cycling on the 3rd floor around 2 a.m. Probably a relay issue. Probably nothing. Marcus pulled the footage to check. He started at midnight, moved at 4 times speed. The hallways looked the way they always looked at night. Emergency lighting, that faint greenish tint to everything. The kind of shadows that made the lockers look like they were, leaning slightly inward. He'd seen it 100 times. Didn't bother him. At 2:31, the lights on the 3rd floor east corridor began flickering. Not all of them. Not in a pattern that suggested a relay issue. They flickered in a line. One fixture, then the next, then the next, like something was moving underneath them. He slowed the playback to 1 times. The flickering continued down the hall for about 40 feet, then stopped. Then the light above the boys' bathroom door went dark completely, and then the bathroom door opened. No one went in. He rewound it, watched again. No one went in. The door opened inward, which meant whatever opened, it was on the inside. It swung about halfway, paused, and then a shape moved through the doorway. He leaned forward in his chair, that habit of his, and for a second he thought it was a coat. A long coat hanging on the back of the door, maybe caught by an air current from a vent. But it wasn't hanging. It was moving, slowly. The way a person moves when they're not in a hurry. It cleared the door frame and turned right toward the stairwell. And then it passed under the next light, and the light went out, and the next, and the next, and after the 4th one, the hallway was dark, and Marcus sat there in his chair for about 30 seconds. Before he realized his hand was on the edge of the desk, and he was gripping it. He called his supervisor. His supervisor watched the clip and said it was probably a camera glitch, compression artifact, something like that. He sent it to the district tech office. They said the same thing. Marcus nodded along. He wrote up the log, filed it, went home. He did not tell them that he'd kept watching the footage, past the dark hallway, past the moment the lights came back on at 3:04 a.m. for no logged reason. He did not tell them that he had gone back to the exterior camera, the one pointed at the building's east face, and that at 2:53 a.m., every window on the third floor east corridor was dark except for one, the bathroom window, and something was standing in it. There are more accounts like this one. Stay with me. Not looking out, not moving, just standing there the way a person stands when they've been somewhere a long time and they're not ready to leave. The window was small. The shape barely fit. Marcus had stared at that still frame for a long time before he finally closed the file. That was 4 years ago. He still works the same desk. He still has the same thermos. He has not once, since that night, pulled footage from that building after midnight. Not because his supervisor told him not to, because he already knows what's on it, and he doesn't think knowing more would help him. Story 2. Donna in the theater. The first time he saw her, he thought someone had stayed late. Ray had been custodial staff at Pocatello High for going on 6 years by the time any of it started. He was 53, divorced, lived 20 minutes out of town in a house that had more room than he needed. He worked the afternoon to close shift, sometimes longer when there were events. Theater. Nights were the worst. Lots of foot traffic, popcorn ground into the carpet, near the exit doors, and the stage area always needed to be reset after performances. He didn't mind the work. He minded being alone with it. It was a Thursday, no performance scheduled, sometime in late winter. He was in the theater to replace a bulb in the upper stage light rack, the one on the two of the far left that had been flickering for 2 weeks. He set his ladder up at the back of the stage, climbed up, was messing with the housing. The house lights were on. The seats were empty. He could see the whole auditorium from up there. Halfway through the job, he looked down, and there was a woman in the 4th row. Long dress, dark hair, sitting very still with her hands folded in her lap, looking at the stage, not at him specifically, at the stage, the way an audience member sits, upright, patient, waiting for something to begin. Ray said, "We're closed tonight, hun." Just like that, the way he'd say it to any late student, polite but final. She didn't move. He climbed down from the ladder, figuring he'd walk her out. He came around the side of the stage, came down the steps at stage left, turned up the aisle. The 4th row was empty. All the rows were empty. He stood there for a moment and looked at where she'd been sitting. The seat was in the up position, the kind that springs back when no one's in it. He checked the row in front of it and the row behind it. Nobody. He told himself the angle from the ladder had been misleading. Shadows in the house seats, the way the light raked across the rows. It did strange things. He was 53 and had spent more hours in artificial light than natural, and his eyes weren't what they used to be. He went back up the ladder and finished the bulb. The second time was 2 weeks later, different night. He was mopping the stage. Apron, moving backward toward the wings, not paying particular attention to the house. He heard a sound from the seats, not a voice, more like a shift, like weight settling into upholstery. He turned around. 4th row, same spot, same woman, same dress, same stillness. He left the mop where it was. He walked up the aisle faster than he intended. 2. He counted the rows as he went so he wouldn't lose his nerve. 3rd row, 4th row, empty. The seat was up again. His heart was going in a way that made him aware of it, which wasn't normal for him. He asked around, quietly, after that. Old-timers in the district. One of them, a woman who'd retired after 22 years in the building, listened to his description without blinking and said, "Don't go looking for an explanation." He asked, "Why not?" She said, "Because you'll find one, and it won't make you feel better." She didn't elaborate. He didn't push. He still works there. He still does the theater. He does not, anymore, look at the house seats while he's on the stage. He stares at whatever he's working on. And he does his job, and he leaves. Once, a few months ago, he heard the sound. Again, that settling sound, the creak of upholstery taking weight. He didn't turn around. He kept mopping. He finished the row, gathered his supplies, and walked out of the theater the same way he always does. He doesn't know if she watched him go. He decided, a long time ago, that not knowing was the better option. Take a breath. If something in these stories has stayed with you, a detail, a feeling, something it brought back, I'd like to hear about it in the comments. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's a good time. More of these are coming. Story 3. What the gym does after midnight. She played varsity ball for 3 years and she never once felt comfortable in that gym alone. Priya was a point guard, not the flashiest player on the team, but consistent, coachable. Her parents had moved to Pocatello from Boise when she was 12, which meant she was always slightly the new kid, even by junior year. The gym was where she went to reset. Early mornings before school, late evenings when the rest of the team had gone home. She liked the way the sound changed in an empty gym, the squeak of her sneakers on the hardwood, the rattle of the backboard when she put a shot up hard. She started noticing things in the fall of her junior year. Small things first. The temperature near the northeast corner of the gym. The far corner from the entrance, behind the old bleacher set that didn't fold out anymore. That corner was always cold. Not cool the way concrete walls get cold. Cold like the air. There had a different weight to it. She mentioned it to the athletic director. Once. He shrugged and said the vents on that side were older. She accepted that, because it was easier. The first time something happened, she was shooting free throws at around 7 p.m. Everyone else had left. She was in her zone. 2 dribbles, breath, release. And she heard footsteps in the bleachers. Old wood settling, she thought at first. Except they were rhythmic. Step, 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 moving laterally. She lowered the ball and looked over. The bleachers were empty. The footsteps stopped. She went back to shooting. 2 dribbles, breath, release. They started again. She lowered the ball again, stopped again. She stood there holding the ball and stared at that section of bleachers for a long time, long enough that her arms started to get heavy. And then she picked up her bag and she left. She told herself the old wood expanded when the heat kicked on. She repeated it all the way to her car. The second time was 3 weeks later. Evening practice had run long. She stayed to work on her crossover alone on the court, and she became aware that the air in the northeast corner had changed. Not the temperature, the quality, the way. A room changes when a door opens somewhere in the building, like a pressure shift. She looked at the corner. There was something there. She couldn't tell you what it was, and she still can't. Not a shape exactly, More like the space in that corner had a density it didn't have before. Weight. Like something was in it that wasn't there when she'd walked in. She stood at center court with the ball under her arm, and she looked at that corner. And she did not move for what felt like a very long time. And whatever was in, that corner did not move either. She left again. This time, she didn't rationalize it. She just left. She sat in her car in the parking lot for 10 minutes with the engine running before she pulled out. She talked to a teammate, one she trusted. The teammate went quiet for a second, then said, "The corner by the old bleachers?" Priya said yes. The teammate just nodded, said, "Yeah." Nothing more than that. Just, yeah. Priya graduated 2 years ago. She plays intramural now at her university. New. Gym, high ceilings, bright lights, built 20 years ago. She's never felt anything wrong in it. But she still checks the corners. Habit, she says, if you ask her. Story 4. The sub who didn't come back. She covered one day and never agreed to a second, and she's never said exactly why. Cindy was a substitute teacher. That specific kind of tired that comes from 11 years of walking into classrooms where nobody knows your name. She drove a Civic with one working window and kept a thermos of terrible coffee on the passenger seat, and she had a system. She didn't ask questions about assignments. She didn't try to make friends. She did her day, and she went home. She was professional in the way that people are professional when they've stopped expecting anything from a job. The call came for Pocatello High on a Tuesday, covering a history class on the second floor. 4 periods, sub-plans were on the desk, shouldn't be a problem. She got there early, signed in, found the room. The building was old in the specific way that old public schools are old. You could feel it in the air, something that wasn't quite must and wasn't quite cold, just age sitting in the walls. She opened the classroom, turned on the lights, set down her bag. Her prep period was second, an hour without students. She sat at the desk, grading worksheets, and it was quiet on the second floor. Around 20 minutes in, the lights in the room flickered. Once, she looked up. They steadied. She went back to the papers. Then the door opened. Slowly, the way it opens when someone is being careful. Not the swift push of a kid running late, but a deliberate, measured swing. She looked up and said, "Can I help you?" to whoever was coming in. The door continued to open. All the way to the wall where it stopped. The hallway outside was empty. She sat very still for a moment. There was no draft she could feel. The windows were closed. The vents weren't near the door. She watched the doorway for probably 15 seconds. Nothing moved. She got up, looked into the hall in both directions. An empty corridor. She closed the door, sat back down. Told herself old buildings had bad latches. Buildings shift. Doors do this. The second thing happened near the end of the prep period. She was looking down at a worksheet, pen in hand, when she became aware, the way you become aware, of something without quite knowing why, that the room was different behind her. Not a sound, not a movement she'd caught in her peripheral vision, just a change. Like the air pressure at her back had altered, like there was something behind her that hadn't been there before. She turned around. The room was empty. 24 desks in 4 rows, all empty, chairs tucked in. Window at the back, letting in flat October light. Nothing. She finished the day. She was professional about it. The students didn't notice anything, and she didn't say anything. She signed out at the front office at 3:20, said thank you, walked to her Civic, sat in it for a few minutes without starting it. Then she drove home. When the district office called her the following week to cover the same room, she said she wasn't available. They called again 2 weeks later. She said she wasn't available. They've stopped calling for that building. She doesn't talk about it in detail. There's one thing she'll say if you press her, that the worst part wasn't the door, and it wasn't the feeling at her back. It was what she noticed when she was packing up her bag at the end of the day. The sub-plans the teacher had left were face up on the desk. She'd been working around them all day, but when she picked them up to stack them, the page underneath, which she hadn't touched, had been turned over, face down, placed neatly under the stack, like someone had been reading it while she worked. She's reasonably certain she didn't do it herself. Take a breath, wherever you're listening from tonight. I hope someone's nearby. If something in these accounts has touched something real for you, leave it in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is a quiet moment to do it before the next story starts. Story 5. The one the janitor won't name. He told me he wasn't going to use her name, not because he didn't know it, because he'd made a decision a long time ago that naming it gave it something, and he wasn't willing to do that. Hector had worked custodial at Pocatello High for 19 years. He was methodical, quiet, the kind of man who noticed things, a scuff on baseboards that others walked past, a flickering exit sign that had been ignored for a week, a smell that didn't belong in a room. He had a grown daughter in Boise, and he went to Mass on Sundays, and he did not, as a general rule, talk about what he'd seen at work over the years. But his daughter had told someone, and that someone told someone else, and eventually the story came around to me. It started about 7 years in, a smell. He kept catching it in the east. Stairwell between the second and third floors. Flowers, he said. Old flowers. The way they smell when they've been sitting in water too long. Not every day. Maybe once or twice a week. Always in the evening, always on that landing. He mentioned it to one of the other custodians, who shrugged and said old buildings had odd pockets of air. He let it go. Then the temperature. That same landing. That same stretch of stairwell. He started arriving at work and finding it noticeably colder than the rest of the floor. Not drafty, still. The way a room gets cold when it's been closed for a long time and nobody's been in it. He'd move through the cold spot and be past it in 4 steps. But it didn't move, didn't vary. And in summer, when their building was warm, it was the one place that stayed cold. He started timing, himself going through it. He doesn't know exactly when that started, but at some point, it had become habit. He'd hold his breath slightly on those 4 steps, and then let it out on the other side. The first time he saw her, he didn't know what he was seeing. A figure on the landing above him. This was a Saturday, building empty, about 4 p.m. He was coming up from the second floor, and he looked up, and there was someone on the 3rd floor landing, female, dressed that was too formal for a school building, standing with her back to the wall, facing down the stairs, looking at him. He stopped, said hello. She didn't answer. He took another step up. She was still there. He took another step, turned the landing corner, and she was gone. The cold spot was gone too, that day. Or maybe he moved through it so fast he didn't register it. He stood on the 3rd floor landing for a moment and felt the air, and it was ordinary air, the same temperature as the rest of the floor. And there was no smell of flowers. He saw her 3 more times over the next decade, Always that stairwell, always. Same dress, always looking down at him. Never a face he could see clearly. The light in that stairwell did something strange to things above eye level. The last time was about 2 years ago. He came up the stairs and she was there, and he stopped and he looked at her. Really looked, longer than he had before. And what he noticed was that she wasn't standing on the floor. She was standing, slightly above it, not floating dramatically, not hovering in some theatrical way, just off by a few inches, the way a photograph can look right, and then you notice one thing that tells you it isn't. He nodded at her. He doesn't know why he did it. Then he turned and went back, down the way he'd come, and used the west stairwell instead. He still uses the west stairwell. He will not say her name. He says that. Whatever she is, she's been there longer than him, and she hasn't hurt anyone. And he figures the least he can do is give her the stairs. Story 6. Holiday weekend building locked. The thing about reviewing security footage is that you learn very quickly what normal looks like, and then one night something isn't normal and you can't unknow it. Dana worked the overnight monitoring desk for the district. Not at anyone. School, but at the central office with a wall of screens showing feeds from across the district. She was 26, relatively new, took the overnight because it paid better and she was trying to clear some debt. Quiet work. Mostly. She read. She made notes. She logged anything unusual. It was Thanksgiving weekend, her second year on the job. Every school in the district was locked and empty. She was the only person in the monitoring office. She had coffee and a library book and a bag of pretzels, and she figured she'd get through 100 pages before dawn. The feeds cycled on the screens. Gymnasium, exterior east, exterior west, main hallway, upper hallway, cafeteria, empty rooms, parking lots with no cars, the particular darkness of buildings that nobody's in. At 1:18 a.m., the feed from the main corridor at Pocatello High went to static. She tabbed to it immediately. Not unusual. Cameras lost signals occasionally. Old wiring, whatever. She made a note and watched the static, waiting for it to resolve. It lasted about 40 seconds. Then the feed came back. But it came back different. The angle was slightly wrong. Not dramatically, not so much that she could point to something specific, just a fraction of a degree. Enough to make the corridor look like a corridor she almost recognized. She checked. The camera log. No movement registered. The camera had not been touched. She kept watching. The corridor sat there, empty and still. And then, at 1:23, the light at the far end of the hallway, the fixture above the bathroom, corridor, junction, went out. She watched it. It did not come back on. The hallway was dark at that end now, a hard edge where the light stopped. Something moved in that dark part. She leaned toward the screen. She told herself it was the grain of the camera. Feed. Low resolution. Night mode. That greenish tint that made everything look like it was slightly underwater, but it moved again. It wasn't moving fast. It was moving the way people move when they don't realize anyone's watching. Unhurried. Purposeful. Traveling along the edge of the darkness toward. And she realized this slowly, the understanding arriving before she could stop it. Toward the light. Toward the part of the hallway where she could see it. She picked up the phone. District emergency line. While it rang, she kept her eyes on the screen. The thing in the dark kept moving. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. The thing reached the edge of the light. She could see, not a full shape, Not the kind of thing you could describe clearly in a log. Something that occupied the air differently than air. And then the phone connected, and she said, "I need to flag an anomaly at Pocatello High." And she looked away for 1 second to find her incident number in the log. When she looked back at the screen, the corridor was empty. The light at the far end was back on. Everything was still. "There are more accounts like this one. Stay with me." She described what she'd seen. The supervisor on call said he'd send someone to check in the morning. He did. Morning crew found nothing. Doors locked, no sign of entry. Cameras checked out fine. Dana wrote it up in the incident log. Anomalous movement, unresolved, footage, archived. She filed it correctly and never brought it up again. But she kept the archived clip. She's watched it probably a dozen times, trying to find the angle, where it becomes a shadow, a reflection, a camera artifact. She has not found that angle. She says the worst part, the part she comes back to, is not the shape in the darkness. It's the moment the light came back on. Because the light coming back on is what made it feel intentional. Like whatever was there had made a choice about whether she got to see it, and had decided this time that she didn't. Take a breath. If you've witnessed something you still can't explain, or someone close to you as we want to hear it, send it to our Gmail in the description. No judgment, just listening. Story 7. The building remembers. She was the kind of teacher who came in early and stayed late, and she says the first year she mostly ignored it, and the second year she started paying attention. And by the third year she had decided the building was telling her something she wasn't equipped to understand. Natalie had been teaching English at Pocatello High for 8 years when she finally put it all together in a way she couldn't take apart again. She'd started as a graduate student, stayed on, loved the school and the complicated way teachers love old buildings, for what they'd witnessed, for the weight they carried, for the way a room full of desks still felt occupied, even when everyone had gone home. She was in her mid-30s, practical, not given to dramatic thinking. She had plants on her windowsill and a system for grading essays, and a coffee cup that said nothing on it, which she felt was a choice. The experiences had come separately over the years. A student staying after, class who asked her what was wrong with the third floor east hallway, not describing anything specific, just saying it felt different over there, heavier. She'd told the student it was old building ventilation and moved on. A parent, volunteer working late in the library, who'd asked carefully if anyone else ever heard things in the building after hours. Footsteps above, on a floor that should be empty. She'd said buildings make noise. A custodian who'd mentioned it without drama that the theater was best avoided after 7 if you could help it. She'd nodded and changed the subject. These were separate threads, unspooled across 3 years, and she hadn't yet held them together. The night she did, she was working late on a Thursday in February, grading junior essays, the building mostly empty. She had music playing low on her computer. Around 8 p.m., the music stopped, the way it stops when the browser times out. She didn't reach for it immediately. She sat in the quiet for a moment, thinking about the essay in front of her, and in that quiet, she became aware of a sound in the hallway. Footsteps coming from the east corridor. Slow footsteps, not rushed, not a student jogging past, just a steady, even pace. She looked at her door, which was open. She waited for whoever it was to pass. The footsteps continued down the corridor. She counted them without meaning to. They passed her doorway. She saw nothing. The hall outside was lit and empty. The footsteps continued past her, unhurried, and continued to the end of the hall, and she heard them turn. The slight change in sound you get when something rounds a corner, and they faded down toward the stairwell. She sat for a moment, then she got up and went to her door and looked both ways. Down the hall. Nobody. She was used to the building by now, its sounds and its particular silences, and she stood in her doorway and thought about the student who'd mentioned the 3rd floor east, and the parent who'd mentioned sound above empty rooms, and the custodian who'd avoided the theater after 7. And she thought about how old the building was, 1893, which meant over a century of students walking those corridors, over a century of people spending formative hours of their lives in these rooms. It was not a comforting thought. It should have been. Maybe. It wasn't. Because what she kept arriving at, standing there in the doorway, listening to the building settle into its evening silence, was not the question of what was still here. It was the question of why. Why stay? Why pace these halls after? Everyone's gone home. What are you waiting for in an old school in Pocatello, Idaho, after the lights go out and the doors lock and the last car leaves the parking lot? She went back to her desk. She finished grading. She packed her bag. On her way out, she walked down the east corridor toward the stairwell in the direction. The footsteps had gone, and she paused at the top of the stairs and listened. The building was quiet. The air on that landing was cold in a way the rest of the building wasn't. She stood there for a moment, not sure what she was waiting for. Then she went down the stairs and out to her car and drove home. She still works there. She is still the kind of teacher who comes in early and stays late. She still has the plants on the windowsill and the plain coffee cup, and the system for grading essays. She has not told her students about the footsteps or the cold on the landing, or the way the building sometimes feels, like it's holding its breath at the end of the day. She doesn't know what she'd say. She only knows that she's thought about it almost every day for 5 years, and she hasn't found an answer, and she suspects she is supposed to. The building has been standing since 1893. It was standing before any of the people into these stories were born. It will be standing long after. Whatever it holds, whatever walks its hallways after midnight and sits in its empty theater and stands in its stairwells and watches from its bathroom windows. It was there first, and it shows no signs, after all this time, of being ready to leave. 7 accounts from one building in a small city in Idaho. 7 people. A security monitor, a custodian, a student, a substitute teacher, a night custodian, an overnight monitor, a teacher, each of whom saw or heard or felt something that the building wasn't supposed to have in it. None of them knew. The others, not really. None of them compared notes. They each arrived at the same quiet conclusion on their own, that the building holds something, and that, whatever it isn't interested in being understood, only in being noticed. You're alone in the dark right now, headphones on, the night quiet around you. And somewhere in Pocatello, Idaho, a building that's been standing for over 100 years is also quiet. Its hallways empty, its lights off, and if there's a camera watching that 3rd floor east corridor tonight, and someone has the footage queued up, I hope for their sake that it's still